There we go. There we go. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the pixeLobby podcast. I am your host, Brian Mundy, and I also have with us today our founder of the pixeLobby, Cindy Wilkerson. Hello, Cindy.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, I want to talk to our audience in the fact that they can give us a hand. They can give us a helping hand by sharing this podcast, perhaps, link to it to other groups they might be associated with. Share it with coworkers and friends, but ask anybody to come in, sign up, go to iTunes and subscribe. That way they can download the podcast automatically. And the convenience of listening to it at any time when you're jogging or working out in the morning. Oh, who am I kidding? None of us jog or work out. But whenever you have time, you can listen to us at the office or just to drive in the car. So, Cindy, why don't you tell us and introduce our special guest?
Well, we have Mark S. Johnson here with us, and he is one of our featured artists at pixeLobby.com, and we have a Facebook group. He has a big presence over there, and he's a good friend, Mark S. Johnson.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, Mark, how are you?
Oh man, I'm doing really well, and I appreciate you guys having me on the show here.
Oh, we're excited and we feel honored.
Me too. Thanks.
So why don't you, for the maybe two people out there who really don't know much about you and your career and what you've done, why don't you give us a explanation or brief history of Mark Johnson?
I'd be delighted to. Yeah. So right now I am best known as a Photoshop instructor. I have a website, MSJ Photography, and the site is loaded up with all kinds of, I think, kind of creative, inspiring Photoshop tutorials. And I also occasionally lead workshops around the country and give interviews and things like this. I've done a lot of lecturing in front of audiences, and I just have a really intense passion for image making, and particularly image making where somebody is accessing kind of what's in their heart and what they really want to express to people. And so
can I interrupt you for
Yes.
2 seconds?
Yes.
I love that you said intense, because when you look at your images, your colors are intense. They're mind-blowing, and they're inspiring, they're fun, but intense is a perfect word. I think that's awesome.
Yeah. It's interesting. When I look at kind of the images I've made, and they've evolved a lot over the years, and I'll get to that in a second, but when I look at them, I have an obsession with color. There's something for me about, I can talk about colors, and I get goosebumps when I'm talking about them. I'm just so, I don't know what it is about me, but there's something that just loves color so much. But what's interesting is I've also discovered that in addition to that side of me that loves these vivid colors, I also have a side that really kind of likes the dark, grungy, sort of heavy.
Isn't that fun? Yes.
Maybe that's my shadow side, trying to have its voice or something. But I'm also really drawn to that. I mean, if you made me choose, I'm a color guy. I love the color, but for me, it's about kind of both ends of the spectrum and loving all of that. But let me go back for just a moment and give you just a little bit of the history that Brian mentioned a moment ago. So I've been making images for as long as I can remember, but for me, it actually began with moving pictures. I was a television editor back in the early to mid-'90s, and I just realized that industry wasn't giving me the freedom I needed to really express what I wanted to express, and it was a bit hard for me to sit in the dark rooms day in and day out with tight deadlines and uptight producers. So I made a decision. I took a trip to Camden, Maine that was sort of like this trip of epiphanies, and during that trip I decided that I wanted to live in a smaller town, a more beautiful place, which led me to Boulder, Colorado, where I live now. And I wanted to work with still images. I really wanted to do something with that. And so it's funny because when I went to Camden, the Kodak Center for Creative Imaging was there.
Yep.
And it was like the first amazing digital school ever. And I was so fired up about visiting that school. When I got there, it had gone out of business. But I wasn't heartbroken. I was just happy, and I went on about, working with my camera and doing things. But so I took a big leap back in 1996. I said, I'm not going to edit anymore. I'm going to get out of doing this. I'm going to go into still photography. I don't know what that path is going to look like, but I followed my heart, and I walked into my general manager's office. I said, I'm not going to edit anymore. He said, okay. The very next day, I got offered a job working for the Olympics as an editor. And I was like, that's too hard to pass up, and it's short term. It's like 6 months. I'm going to do this job. It's going to give me the money I need to get out to Colorado, and it's going to enable my next move. And when I got out to Colorado, I took a job at a local photo lab, doing whatever I could get my hands on, so I could learn all of the processes that are behind photography, not the actual taking of the pictures, but everything else, the printing and processing the film, and so I learned a lot about that, and was having a great time, and was really enjoying my new passion. And I noticed that when I was on the customer service counter, I noticed that a lot of people were coming in saying, hey man, I need to do something to this picture. Do you have any ideas? And I was like, well, you know what? Coming from the broadcast industry, I already know Photoshop. Maybe I can help you with that. And so it was right then, I think it was like 1997, I started tutoring a lot of people on the side working with Photoshop. And before long, I was getting so much of that business that I left the lab and I started tutoring full-time, and that led to some jobs like teaching at the Rocky Mountain School of Photography in Montana, which, by the way, is an amazing photo school, and other types of teaching jobs sort of evolved from there. And then I began a website, I think it was like maybe 11 or 12 years ago, called the Radiant Vista with my friend Craig Tanner. And the Radiant Vista was designed so that we could inspire people. We wanted people to see what you can do with Photoshop from my end, and Craig, he's just a master photographer, and so he taught the kind of the capture end. And anyway, Radiant Vista was super cool, and I don't want to ramble on too long about it, but it was super cool, and it was one of the first sites of its kind, and that led into where I am now, which is where I created MSJ Photography. And if I have something to say to the audience out there, it's just if you're really passionate about something, no matter what it is, find ways to integrate it into your life. If it doesn't become your career, that's okay, but I really believe in kind of taking leaps of faith and dreaming big and pursuing what you love, kind of feeding yourself with that. And with that, I'll stop talking for a moment, and I'll let you guys have a word.
Right now, I feel like saying, I'm not worthy. That's impressive.
Well, but the whole thing is, we're all worthy. That's the whole message behind this, is that it's like every one of us has things to say. Every one of us has something that we want to put out there, and so it's so beautiful when somebody does that, even if you're just doing it quietly in your own home. If you're just finding ways to let your voice out, everybody's got to start somewhere. That's the whole thing. Is we're all at different points in our knowledge, and every one of those is a valid point.
So when you were in high school, were you looking towards the arts, or did that happen when you were in college? When did you decide that's the road I want to be taking?
Yeah.
Or have you already known it your whole life?
No, I did not know it at all my whole life. In fact, I'd never even touched a camera until college, I don't think. But you know what did it for me? This is a big deal, and this is why I believe in the power of really great teachers. When I was a senior in high school, I was somehow thrust into the position of being the editor-in-chief of the yearbook, even though I didn't know a thing about editing a yearbook. Brian must. I just saw. He just his arms went up. He must be know something.
Yearbook nerd.
What's that?
I'm a yearbook nerd.
Yeah, but so I don't know how I got that position, but the cool part about it was I had a yearbook advisor that year. His name was Scott Clevenger, and this guy, he didn't play by the rules. I don't like this expression, but he really did think outside the box, and he wanted to do things with passion and with fun, and he wanted to do things differently, and he wasn't stuck in a pattern, and that guy brought me to life. I mean, that was when I knew I wanted to do something in my life with images. I didn't know if they were going to be photos or television stuff, which I got into for a period of time, or what. I didn't know what it was, but I loved images and I loved being able to kind of tell the stories. So that was when I caught fire, and I went to college and I studied broadcasting. And as I told you, that was fun while it lasted, but I didn't stick with it. I allowed myself to evolve into, wherever my heart took me.
Mark, you're really scaring me. I had the same exact teacher in California, and his name was Sailor Smith.
Really?
Exactly the same thing. Didn't play by the rules. Allowed us students to call him by his first name.
Yeah.
Into his house. It was
a
turning point in many of our lives. And as I've mentioned before on the show, my wife was editor of the newspaper, and so I tease she's always been my boss. I was head photographer, but I ended up marrying the editor of the newspaper. So
yeah, well, it all isn't this just a testament to the power of somebody who's a passionate teacher and who does it, shares openly and does it without a big ego, and they're very authentic, and you can feel that when you're a student, and it makes all the difference. Yeah. So I'm so glad you had that experience. I wish that experience on everybody.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think it's vital, and I think the enthusiasm, the inspiration, these are all words that you guys are using in what you're talking about. And for me, I have 5 children, as everybody knows, and I worked at the school with the kids, and the kids and the teachers that are successful are the ones that will bring that enthusiasm, that passion, and if you have those two, you're able to inspire. And I think it also defines you as the person I've seen you in on the boards, online presence, all of that. It's always been positive, enthusiastic, and very inspiring. And I have many, many people come to me all the time. So who was that guy that, and I'd always say, probably Mark. Probably Mark. And I always try to, send off, a lot of people come to me all the time and talk to me about you in a very positive manner. And I think that you are you're expressing yourself the way that you were taught, and it was really wonderful.
That's really beautiful. That's really heartwarming. I appreciate you saying that, and I just I'm trying to think where I was going to go with my train of thought. I had like 3 trains of thought as you were saying that, but I feel like there's maybe too much negativity being focused on and being reported in the world. And I really am a believer. I know there's so much good stuff going on out there. There's so many good people, and I'm a real big believer in putting as much attention as I possibly can on positive energy and what people are doing in the world to make a difference. To me, that sort of thinking, if more of us can adopt it, it's going to change the world. It doesn't mean we don't all have challenges and go through difficult periods and deal with being human, which is a roller coaster ride, for crying out loud. But it means if we choose to put our attention on being positive and sharing that with others through our art and through the words we use in social media and other places, that's the tide that I want to see coming in, and I believe that there's a mass of great people out there who can help
Absolutely.
kind of bring that in.
That being said, why don't you kind of walk us through some of your images? Obviously, since this is speaking, we're on a podcast, they're not seeing your images, but hopefully they'll go to your site and see some of your beautiful work. But why don't you walk us through your thought process in creating some of your pieces? Because, all of the ones that I've looked at always have a positive tone or note to it. I know you said you like your dark side, and I've seen some of those too, but even in those, they're not like dark, like scary. There's
Right,
always
yeah.
something positive about them and everything. But I would love, there's an image hanging right behind you that I can see. Why don't we can start with that, or talk about the little girl with the balloons? We see that picture often, and some of the others. Kind of explain where you kind of drag your pieces together from.
Absolutely, yeah. And one thing I want to check in with is, Brian, did you have something to add back there a moment ago? I thought it looked like you were about to say something, and maybe you didn't.
Yeah, I was just going to, again, for me, there was a passion of photography. And I went to college and studied photography and graphic arts. And my goal in mind was to be a photographer, and then I went to work for a photo lab and worked there for over 30 years. But I found myself, because just like you, if I work at a lab, I can immerse myself and learn all these things, from developing film to printing to color printing to all of that. And I started as the evolution of moving into digital came along, I went to UCI and got a degree for computer graphics and started the digital side of the company. So my life evolved around the computer pretty much, in Photoshop and Illustrator and InDesign, just all the things we use in the graphic side. Where did it start for you? Well, I mean, I know it was broadcasting. But did you move into photography first, or like me, spent a lot of your life behind the glowing monitor?
When I took my job in Atlanta, learning how to edit for television, when I got to deal with the guy who was the paint box artist, which meant he was working primarily in Photoshop. He was using Illustrator, and he may have been even using other things like a Quantel paint box and other stuff like that. But he was using a lot of Photoshop, and during my breaks or my spare time, I would go over there and I would look over his shoulder and see what he was up to. And he was doing such cool stuff. And this was back in Photoshop version 2.5, I think.
We were just talking about 2.5 the other day.
I make a T-shirt for that or something. When did you start Photoshop and put the version or something?
Yeah, well, and that's cool. That's a good idea. He was still, and I'm air quoting this. He was still layering things using channels, because there weren't layers yet. Those came along in version 4, I think, or no, 3, and 4 was adjustment layers. But yeah, and so he was still layering with channels, and so it was more complicated.
We only had one undo.
Right, one undo. That's right. But I just looked at what he was up to, and I thought, man, that is the coolest ever. And then, here's another big turning point. It was while I was at that same Peachtree Post, broadcast or production facility. One day, this dude, I think his name was Brad. He worked, in sort of an adjacent company that was doing visual stuff, or audio maybe, I don't remember. He came in from a trip to Europe, and he had a light table with him, and he put some film down on that light table, and I looked at it, and I was like, oh my God, I have never seen colors like that on film. And I said, what's going on here, man? And Brad said to me, he said, this is a new film. It's called Fuji Velvia. And when I saw Velvia, I wanted to take pictures. I was like, man, I think I can actually capture what my mind and what my heart are seeing out there and show it to people now because it's got the color rendition. It's sort of like God, this was maybe, I don't know, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, when Epson released the HDR ink set in their printers. That's the first time I was able to see a print come out, aside from like the super high-end light jet printers or Chromeras or whatever. That was the first time I was able to see a print come out of like a home printer where the colors were as vivid as what I had on my calibrated display. And so for me, those are moments in life where I feel, oh, finally the technology has caught up to where I can convey what I want to convey, and I don't have to make any apologies and say, wow, those colors were really more beautiful than that.
Cindy, I think you can just go to lunch. Me and Mark can just talk shop.
You know what? No, you're mean, because I am really into this. As he's speaking, I remember when I was a kid, my dad had told me I had watched TV too much because I saw in color what the whole show, and apparently the show was in black and white. But in my mind, my imagination saw the color, and I could let my imagination go. So a lot of those black and white films, I remember in color. And so when I see the color on the boxes, they've now colorized some of those boxes, I'm like, no, her dress was really pink. It wasn't blue. And you go and you watch it, and it's black and white. And I'm like, oh, my goodness. It was really my imagination the whole time. I think your view of colors reminds me of that. And for me, a lot of times it was color was one thing, being able to see color, but also the aperture and the focus and the different focal points, being able to play with that really drew me in, and being able to play with what someone's looking at. Are you seeing the whole picture, or are you just seeing one little area? And those different things are really intriguing to listen to, what drew you in and stuff. But
yeah, well, when I read Brian Peterson's Understanding Exposure book, and he showed the depth of field stuff, and
oh yes,
it was so exciting. And then Galen Rowell's Mountain Light, those are a couple of the early books I remember reading where I just, it was a healthy addiction I was in. I'm going to find out more about this stuff.
Definitely.
Well, we should get back. Unfortunately, I kind of railroaded or took over your question there, Cindy.
No, I'm having fun. This is great.
We have a lot to talk about, so I'm glad we can take tangents. That's beautiful.
Yeah. Back to talking about your thought process and what you're doing and creating some of the images. As Cindy said, the one that we can kind of view, unfortunately our audience doesn't see that. The image.
I'll tell them where they can see it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what we're looking at, audience, is a picture of a flower pot that is smashed on the floor, and it's got a beautiful orchid in it. And the flower pot has a man's face sort of contoured, etched into the pot. And it's one of my photo composites. I got into photo compositing really intensively, I think it was maybe 4 or 5 years ago, probably about 5 years ago. And that, to date, remains my favorite thing because it's the most challenging thing that I've done relating to photography, and probably more importantly, it allows me to tell a story with just one picture, which is a big deal for me. I mean, I love beautiful pictures, and in fact, if you go to my the gallery I have on MSJ Photography, audience, if you go to that gallery and you look through, I've got mine categorized by year, and if you look at my earliest work, I was taking a lot of big landscapes and a lot of beautiful pictures back then, and I loved them, and that was right where I was, and it was perfect. But for me, those don't tell a story, and so as I evolved as an artist, I wanted to be able to tell more stories, and so that's one reason I gravitated toward the photo compositing. So again, the galleries on my website, if you go into them beginning right around probably 2012, 2013, and look at the galleries moving forward to where we are now, you can see some of these photo composites that we're going to be talking about. So I think that'd be nice for the audience to be able to do. And so the one in particular with the flower pot smashed on the floor. So I'm a big believer in learning by imitating. I think that if you imitate a lot of what you see out there that gets you fired up, then you're going to learn, and ultimately you're going to develop your own voice as you begin imitating. So some people will say, "Oh, no, don't imitate, don't copy," but I don't believe in that. I think it's a really powerful way of learning and evolving into your own vision and your own voice. So this image that we're talking about, if you look at the adaptation movie poster, you're going to see the direct inspiration for this photo composite. The movie poster has something very similar to what I have in my photo composite. And when I saw that poster back in, that was probably, 15 years ago, maybe more, the image never left my mind. And so I said to myself, I am determined to learn how that artist, that brilliant artist, created that image, and I'm going to do one of my own and see what happens. And man, I had so much fun doing that. It was awesome. But I was copying a movie poster, because movie posters are a huge source of inspiration for me. And I should also say that I think it's the adaptation movie poster. It's based on the book Orchid Thief, which was a pretty cool book too. So anyway, that's what that one's all about. You want to talk about the girl with the balloon?
Yes, that would be great. Whichever one you feel.
Oh, I got a bunch. I could go on. I could go on forever, but we don't want people to fall asleep. So the girl with the balloon, there's a girl standing in a meadow. She's backlit. The sun is behind her. And there is a fish floating inside her balloon. And I'm trying to remember what it was. Oh, I know what. All right, I know what brought this to mind for me. And per the usual, it wasn't me. It's almost never me who comes up with these ideas. My daughter said to me, I was talking to her, I was like, Allie, I want to make a photo composite. I want something really whimsical and silly and fun. What can I come up with that would be fun? And we were just talking, and she said, Daddy, what about a fish in a balloon? And I was like, oh, Allie, I like that. That's really got a great feeling to it. So I went about creating that composite, and I remember a couple things about it. One is Corey Barker, who teaches for Kelby One. I think he's still teaching for them. He had a tutorial about how to create a balloon, I believe. And so I used his tutorial to create a balloon, which was pretty cool. I don't think the balloon I ultimately ended up using was that balloon. But anyway, Corey's a great guy. A lot of amazing instruction from him. So that's where I was going with that. The other thing is, when I started compositing, intensively 5 years ago or so, I realized that as much as I loved compositing, if I had to go out and do the photo shoot for every single element in the composite, and I had to find the model, and I had to do their makeup, and I had to do the shoot, and I had to set up the lights, and then I had to take all those images into Photoshop, and I had to mask them all and composite them together. Even though I love every bit of that process, I discovered I wasn't making nearly as many composites as I wanted, especially since my full-time job is teaching. Mm-hmm. So I was like, man, I'm at a crossroads here. What do I do? How do I make more composites? I want to make more composites. It's my favorite thing in the world right now, and creatively, that is. And so here's what happened. This is a cool story. One of the guys who was an editor at Peachtree Post with me back in the early 90s, his name is Chris Wood. He stayed in that industry, and he worked his way kind of up the ladder. And ultimately, he ended up at Rhythm and Hues in Los Angeles, and he was one of the lead compositors on Life of Pi, which won the Academy Award for Visual Effects. And I was so proud of Chris. You know, obviously those guys worked really hard, and there were a lot of brilliant minds working together. And I went out to visit him, and I said, "Man, you got to show me what you're doing because it's just awesome." And even though I'm compositing a lot, I said, "My composites don't look like Hollywood composites." And he looked at me and he said, "Mark, the reason our composites look so good in our films is because we have a lot of hardworking people who are talented. You know, they've worked hard to learn their craft. They're being managed really well by a director who's doing a great job, and they're pushing the limits as best they can, and they're coming together as a village." And I said, "Huh, village. I need a village, man. How can I get a village?" And so the first thing that came to mind for me was, you know what? We're in a day and age where stock photography is very inexpensive, super available, and even though I'd love to do every single thing from shoot to light to composite, I don't have time for that most of the time right now. So I'm giving myself permission to hire a village, and I'm going to start working with a lot of stock images. And so in order to do what I love most, which is compositing, I allow myself, when I can't do the shoot myself, I allow myself to seek out stock images so I can make the composites and tell the stories. And so anyway, the one with the girl in the balloon, I think that was like 7 or so different stock images that all came together to create that. And one final comment, and then I'm going to take a breath and let you guys talk, because I know I go on and on, but one final comment about that one that's kind of important is that if you notice, one of the things that makes that particular composite dramatic is that there's backlight streaming through the scene. And I'm a real big believer in Uli Steiger. If you have never seen his composites, oh my God, he's one of the best there is. He taught me, you know, backlight is an amazing way to create drama in your scenes. Now, what's so cool about it in a photo composite, unlike a regular photo shoot, is in a regular photo shoot, if you want your subject to look good and there's backlight behind them, you got to take a bunch of strobes or something out into the field and shoot them. With a composite, you can shoot your subject in a studio or use a stock image where it's lit beautifully. Right. And then you can bring them together in Photoshop and add the backlight, and you'll get this dramatic scene where there's dramatic backlight and your model, your subject, is lit stunningly. And you just can't, it's really hard to accomplish that in a single capture with your camera. So that's another reason why compositing is awesome, and another reason why backlight is such a powerful feature in Hollywood movies and in photo composites.
Absolutely. What a story.
You know, listening to you too, it kind of, you're so positive. I mean, you can't help but be happy and positive when listening to you, because, you know, you hear a lot in the Photoshop world or the photography world, how bad Photoshop is. And to me, I don't see that. I love Photoshop. I'm a great fan of Photoshop. But see, I always use you know, girls wear makeup, and it does the same reason. It does the same thing. You know, you wear makeup to make things look as good as you can. And you know, listening to you, it really makes me love Photoshop even more, and composites, and see that there is a beauty. There's an art to it. There's, you know, you take your vision in your mind and you put it down on paper, and to be able to do that is a process, and it's creative, it's technical, it's all of those. You have to kind of bring them all together, and it's kind of like conducting an orchestra, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, and I know Brian has thoughts about this, so I want to let him talk about it, and then I've got lots of thoughts about what you just said. So
yeah, you know, Cindy, I want to clarify. First of all, the people that say Photoshop is bad are the people that are struggling or fighting, I think, against the purist of photographers, that it should all be done just in the capture of the camera. And I do a lot of compositing. It's, again, my history of working in Photoshop and stuff like that. And I ran across those struggles, as you know that project I did last year, which was all compositing. And I was with a group in an advanced photography projects class, and they had a hard time with it because in some regards they felt like I was cheating. And to me, when you think of compositing, let's think of some of the master painters of the world. When they're putting their image down on canvas, aren't they in a sense really compositing that image? They're painting a tree, they're painting a sky, they're putting in lighting, they're putting in a subject, they're doing all the same thing. So I don't subscribe and will adamantly argue the point that doing compositing or corrections or enhancements in Photoshop is part of the art.
Yeah, totally agree. I think people are, and I'm really happy to say this, I think people are slowly evolving to understand that that Photoshop is merely a tool that you use in a creative process. I think one of the kind of fallacies is that, and it's one of the reasons there's that attitude that something about Photoshop is wrong, is I think people believe, the people who say that, believe that Photoshop is a matter of pushing a button or pulling a slider and wow, look at what you've got. And we all know, because we've had experience with it, we haven't been fearful of it. And you know, fear is a dangerous thing. We haven't said, I fear that, therefore I'm going to put it down. We've said, oh, that's interesting, I'm curious about that, I'm going to explore that. And so we have explored Photoshop, and you've realized, and anybody who actually takes the time to explore it is going to realize, I'm not saying they have to like it, but if they take the time to get to know it and explore it, they're going to realize that Photoshop does not create great images. A camera does not create great images. Somebody who has a passion and wants to convey something creates the great image. And the tools that they use, be it a camera, a paintbrush with canvas, Photoshop, Cinema 4D, whatever tools they choose to use, as long as they're using those tools along with their craftsmanship to create something compelling, it shouldn't matter what tools they've used at all, because this is about conveying emotions, this is about creating compelling images, and no matter how you get there, it's still a great image or an image that doesn't have impact, you know. And so I'm seeing, because I used to battle against this, I've been teaching Photoshop for a long time, and when Photoshop first came on the scene, there were a lot of, you know, so-called purists, which generally tend to be people who are, again, they're fearful of exploring something new. You know, there are a lot more of them then than I'm seeing now, and there's more and more people understanding, because they're taking the time to get to know the tools. And remember, they are only tools. They're just tools. Well, they don't make the pictures.
And if people understand, you know, even in the darkroom, the different things they use to dodge and burn, you know, or, you know, like the artist, now I always mess up his name, Brian, please help me out, the one that you kind of followed your path last year on, and Mark, if you get a chance to see what Brian did last year, it was really fun. It's Jerry, isn't it?
Jerry Uelsman.
Jerry Uelsman. Oh my God, he's a darkroom god. I love.
Yes.
He's the guy who first inspired me to want to composite.
And I did a whole series emulating his style of work.
And it was beautiful. It's beautiful. So if you get a chance to see it and stuff, but I mean, a lot of people need to take a look back and look at the dark room. And the dark room wasn't just dipping images in chemicals. There was a process to it to make some of those look amazing. In fact, there was a post recently that we saw in our group. Was it Grace Kelly, the image of her and her photographer, where it showed her natural look and then it showed her after he had edited it using the dark room and everything and the process that he went through, and they did have a process to make those images beautiful, to get rid of the blemishes, to make it look flawless, if you will. And basically it has been converted from chemicals into programs, which is what a lot of us use today.
And what's interesting there is his wife is Maggie Taylor, who happens to be an amazing compositor. She takes objects, she scans them into Photoshop.
Jerry Uelsman's wife?
Yeah.
Yes.
And
yeah.
Exactly, Jerry Uelsman's wife. And so this is what I love. He loves making images, and so does she. He loves making his images in a dark room, a wet dark room. She likes making her images with a scanner and Photoshop.
Yep.
Is one better than the other? Absolutely not. Those are two people who know what they want. They choose to get there via a different path, using different tools. But who cares what the tools are? They're conveying their vision. Absolutely. I mean, they're the perfect example of like that. You can do it any way you want. Just make sure you're doing it. Make something.
I bring this all up because I know your history and Brian's, but I'm a kind of photographer who likes the storytelling, but I like to get it all figured out and ready, and I like to do it on shoot, when in camera, and I bring it in. And once in a while, I will tweak and bring and composite it, like, oh, I like how the fabric went on this one. Okay, I can pull this in. But I will do a series of shoots to accomplish, but I have the vision in my head, and I love the creative process of taking it out there and getting it done out there and then bringing it here. And some of my shoots, and so I'm coming from I like to do it in camera, and a semi-purist photographer, if you will, to appreciating and loving what you can do with the programs you have if you have the know-how to do it in the education. And I love seeing what you can do with that education.
Yeah, and I want to make one more comment about this. And this is relating to the ethics of what we all do. Because this is a big deal. If you're shooting an image and it's intended for documentary purposes, and it's published in the paper, and you've gone in Photoshop and you've done a bunch of retouching, and you haven't told anybody about it, well, from an ethical standpoint, that's not acceptable. Because you're trying to convey that documentary moment in time. And so I think one of the bottom lines here that can kind of take everybody down from this idea of being purist or not being purist is just as we make art, if we can enthusiastically, it doesn't have to be enthusiastically, if we can just be honest with others and tell people, I do it enthusiastically, so that's why I use that word, but if we can tell people how we made it, then we're being authentic. We're being honest about the process. And in my case, I can't wait to tell them how I made it because I want to share. Hey, you can do this too. This is something that you can do. But you talked about retouching skin, and that's an interesting little sort of slippery slope because. You look at our magazines on the shelves these days, and everybody is flawless. Everybody's perfect. And I sometimes wonder about that because I wonder what message that's conveying to everybody, including our children, about perfection and where that belongs. So in that case, again, it's a matter of we all know that advertising is not necessarily honesty.
However, this is how, and I'm going to interrupt you here because I have a strong feeling about that. And my feeling is when you have permanent stuff like scars, or you have a mole, or you have whatever is permanent that's going to be with you throughout your whole life, an identifier. that is part of you, I believe those should always stay. Freckles,
Yeah.
those things.
But what if you're
However, acne is not something that always stays with you. One day you might have a North Star, but I will not remember you by that North Star.
North
Does
Star.
that make sense? If you have the biggest blemish on your face that is oozing and disgusting, and it just happened to be on the day of your shoot, well, that really sucks. But that is not who identifies you.
but what
And
if
when
you're
I see you, what's that?
what if your client wants that kind of retouching done to their image to help
Well,
them feel good about themselves and self-esteem
well,
and
exactly. And I've had them. I had a client who had a cleft in her chin,
Mhm.
and she hates it. She's never been able to have it repaired. But see, people go and get plastic surgery.
Yeah.
And you think about it, if that's what's going to make them happy, that's what, people know me. I know how to photo shoot. I have Photoshop, and I will Photoshop, but I will within my rules and boundaries and with them knowing, if they've said, Cindy, my arms are so fat and it just bugs me, I'll take it in for them so it looks pleasant and they love it because in reality we gain weight, we lose weight. It's part of life. I am not my ideal weight in any way, but if someone takes a picture of me and they make me look a little slender, and I'm like, "Ugh, I look beautiful." That's something, at one point in my life I was that slender or I wasn't, and it depends on what you're looking for and what you're shopping for. Does it make it bad or a lie? No. It's because when I see someone and I'm shooting them, I see them for who they are,
Yeah.
And I tell everybody when you look at and purchase my art or hire me, you're hiring my vision of you.
To Mark's point, though, talking about the advertising industry and this false vision of what women are portrayed in most of the advertising nowadays, there's a lot of blame coming and pointing at things like Photoshop and the invention or creation of Photoshop to where all those things are retouched. But, in advertising, this stuff back in the 40s and 50s, those negatives, were creating those images to be the magazine covers, were heavily retouched as well. It's not just a Photoshop anomaly that now is happening.
Yeah, I don't blame Photoshop. I don't blame retouching.
I don't even blame
And
the artist.
well, exactly, and yeah, and I don't blame anybody or anything. I think it all boils down to what is the end goal, what's the end usage, and is retouching acceptable or not, and also, Cindy, I think this is kind of what you were trying to say, but I think the message that I personally want to send out to my daughter and to the world is that beauty, even though I'm an image maker, beauty doesn't lie on the surface. It lies within.
Right.
And you're a beautiful person. You're a
Right.
beautiful person. And you're a beautiful person exactly the way you are right now.
Mm-hmm.
You need nothing. And so that I believe it comes from within. And so I know I'm taking us off in a direction where we could go.
Not at all, because Mark, you look at your work and your work evokes emotion. And I think that's the point that we're making here. It doesn't, you see images and they cause you to be angry, or they cause you to be upset, or they cause you to be happy and to feel love, and all of those, you spark emotion. And that's the same with what you create in your art and through people who are doing their photography and stuff. And as artists, that's what we do. We evoke emotion, and I think that's what we're doing with our tools.
Yeah. And they're just tools, and as long as we're using them ethically, make pictures.
Agreed, totally. Well, guys, let me see. We could talk, it seems to me, for hours and hours here.
Yes, we could. But who will still be listening?
No. I think it's fascinating. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I could listen to these kind of conversations and quite frankly sit there, feel like I'm part of it, even though I can't speak or interact. But that's one of the great things about podcasting and doing that. Does anybody here have anything we want to get in? A question, Cindy, or anything?
I just have, you know, where do you see yourself? Are you going to keep creating images? What are you planning on doing? Do you have plans? Are you moving forward, or would you like to share anything about what's happening in your life right now?
Sure, sure. I'd be delighted to. Yeah, no, I think I'm a born teacher, and so I think teaching is always going to be part of my future. Hard to say in what capacity, but it will always be a part of me. And I am an obsessive image maker who just, I go nuts when I see beautiful things, beautiful images, or things that are really thought-provoking. So image making is a huge part of my future as well. For the past about 9 or 10 months, I have been delving into a new piece of software called Cinema 4D. And initially I got into it because I wanted to do children's books. I've got so many ideas for children's books, and I've read thousands of children's books with my daughter in her first 8 years, and we're at the library all the time, and I just love great children's books. So I still think I want to make them, but I'm not sure. But the reason I got into Cinema 4D is so I could create subjects that I can't photograph. You know, a dragon in a certain posture. It's hard to photograph, right? So that's why I got into Cinema 4D. And what has happened to me is I've gotten totally sidetracked from the idea of the children's book for the time being. And I've discovered a website called Grayscale Gorilla. And there's a guy on there who is, his name is Nick. He's ultra charismatic. He's got a lust for life and for image making, and he's a happy guy, and he teaches great. And what he teaches, he ends up with something really cool at the end. So he's big into animation, and so for the past few months, I've been animating. In the case of, since I don't know how to model things, create the meshes for them, I've been animating a lot of text and a lot of spheres. But I've been trying to do it in a way where I'm creating something that still is fascinating and unique. And I'll give you an example. The other day, I created a bunch of spheres, and I added stained glass material to them, and then I added a light into all the spheres, and I made them explode. Not fracture, but explode outward like the Big Bang Theory, and you have hundreds of stained glass spheres spinning around in this animation.
Sweet.
And this sort of stuff is really exciting to me now, and it's kind of taking me in some new directions in a pretty fast pace, actually. And I'm curious to see where it's going to go. I don't know. I don't know where I'm going to go with this, but I just know that I'm trying to listen to my heart. I'm trying to make things that excite me, and I'm trying to share what I learn with others, and that's good enough for me for now.
Yeah. Grace Gorilla.
Yes.
Totally. Yeah.
Have you seen it yet?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
He's been buying some of his studio lighting setups and some of the models there, and his tutorials are absolutely wonderful. And Mark, on a lot of planes, I think you're my brother from a different mother.
Yeah, it's funny as Brian and I were just getting to know each other today, and it's amazing how many parallel paths we've had in our life.
A lot of the stuff I've done in Cinema 4D is I do a lot of creation of the meshes and models. And I use my photography background for creating photorealistic renderings.
Oh, we have got to talk after this program is done.
So a lot of my 3D renderings actually look like photographs.
I love it. I just love that.
So it's a passion of mine that occasionally comes on strong, and then kind of put it down for a while. and then will come on really strong. And I would use it a lot when I worked at Photomation in the lab. A lot of times when customers wanted to have me design something and had no concept of what it was or what it was going to look like in the lobby of their office, I would literally model the lobby of the office to be able to put in the artwork that we were creating so that they could get a pre-visualization of what it was all going to look like. And it was amazing how fast that got me to an approval on a piece of art, just because they could see what it would look like, and it looks like it's in their lobby.
Yeah, man, that's really that's a great idea for kind of selling a concept. But yeah, I mean, I'm excited to hear more about what you work on. Uli Steiger, who I mentioned earlier in this podcast, he is a photographic artist. If you haven't seen his work, everybody go check it out. He's a photographic artist and a photo compositor who he's the one who got me hooked on Cinema 4D. He creates elements for his photo composites inside of Cinema 4D,
sure,
and then he brings them into Photoshop and composites them, and his stuff looks super cinematic and also unbelievably photorealistic. And the fact that you can create something photorealistic from nothing, that's I get giddy.
So you're probably like me when you see a television commercial and you see a plastic Clorox bottle that's kind of wiggling and dancing and stuff. You're kind of like, ooh, ooh. You know it's done in 3D. It's been animated. Can't take me to any of the movies like Toy Story, because or what was the one with the cooking and the Ratatouille?
Ratatouille.
As the audience is sitting there enjoying the show and the story, I'm like getting up and turning around. But did you see that reflection off of that copper pot?
Yeah. That leads me to one thought that's related but unrelated. I mentioned earlier that my photography has evolved through the years, and this is really cool for me because what photography has done for me throughout the years is it has allowed me to open myself to more and more of the world. And I'll give you an example.
You've entered the matrix.
Yes, exactly. So I started off, a big landscape shooter, and loved that phase. Then I went into a macro botanical phase. Love that. Then I got into impressionism using multiple exposure and long exposure in camera. Then I got into HDR. Then I got into photo compositing. I probably missed some things along the way there. You can look at my galleries and see the evolution. But now that I'm into Cinema 4D and 3D stuff, just like you said, Brian, I am now looking at the world and I'm noticing reflections and shadows, and I'm obsessed with them, just the way I was obsessed with grungy old things when I was doing HDR, and the way I was obsessed with worlds our eyes can't even see when I was photographing macro flowers. And just as I was obsessed with it goes on and on. The more you open yourself up and allow yourself to explore different areas of photography and creativity, the more you know the world, and the more you appreciate everything, including reflections and shadows.
Yeah. I have a question. Do you have a book out with your composites and your work and your art, or do you sell your prints or any prints, or do you have a store of product?
Yeah, I have lots of stuff. If people go to my MSJ photography site and they go into my store, in there I have different categories. I have a premium video tutorial category where they can learn about photo compositing and other things. I have a books category. I've written books on everything from HDR to something called Botanical Dreaming, which is all about macro flower photography and bringing that together with Photoshop. And I've got one called, oh man, what's it called? Hold on, I'm going to look here. This is going to take me just a split second. I've got one called, I wrote this several years ago, but it's called Luminescent World, and that talks about some of my images and the creative things I've done. That's an ebook. So I got a lot of books in there, and for a limited time, and I say this because I don't know how long this this tool is going to stay live, but if you go to my site and you go to the Create Prints button at the top, it takes you, this is so cool, and I wish this had caught on more, and unfortunately the guy who owns this tool, it looks like he may not financially make it through, but he created, this friend of mine created a 3D space, a 3D room, where you can take your images, that's you, the audience, or you can take my images, my photo composites, and all my other stuff from my galleries, right in this tool. You can take those images and hang them up on a 3D wall, and you can move around the image. You can change the frame, the mat, the mount, all of that stuff right in a 3D space, so you can actually see it like you're standing in the room with the artwork. And you can even take a picture of your own space, your own wall, and you can hang my artwork or your artwork up on that wall. And it's brilliant. And so it is for sale, but I don't know how long it's going to last, because he's struggling a little bit right now. So anyway, but yeah, so there's access to my books, there's access to my prints, there's access to all of that right through the store button and the Create Prints button on MSJ Photography. Yeah.
Awesome.
We will have a link in the show notes on that, as well as when we post.
This has been fantastic, Mark, really, and it really has been an honor to have you on our show. I've been looking forward to this from day one of starting the Pixel everything. I knew that I wanted Mark on our show, and so I'm really excited you agreed to join us. It's been really a pleasure.
Oh man, it's been great chatting with you guys. I love where the conversation has gone. I mean, we've covered some ground, haven't we? How long have we been on air here?
We've been on air for just about an hour, just a little bit over an hour.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that's usually the length we like to keep our shows. But I definitely see, Mark, we need to bring you back and have some more conversations.
Definitely.
You know, maybe even a show focused on 3D kind of work and thoughts and process, and it's an interesting world out there doing stuff in 3D. Your composites are amazing, playful, positive, warm, friendly, and I do appreciate also all the contributing you do on the pixeLobby and your posts that you put on there, and I want to thank you very much.
Don't you think, Brian, that we live in a really cool time? I mean, we live in an age where, you know, we have digital capture where we can take an image and have it on the computer moments later, and then we have all these amazing tools like Photoshop and Cinema 4D. It's just it's an age where if you want to create, the resources are there, and if you want to learn, the resources are there with the internet now, and so it's a beautiful time to be alive.
And I agree, and I think it's, you know, again, I was born in 1960, so grew up through the 60s and 70s, and just to think back that very short time and how much technology and access to the world things have become. It is fascinating, and you know, it only bodes to, my gosh, what's going to happen in the future here? What new and amazing things, yeah. And you know, will we?
Which I will add. You know, it's really important that people.
Cindy's going to tell us about the future now. She can look into it. I'm excited.
Yeah. We have a beautiful digital era here, but I think it's just as important to get it printed into physical, you know, pieces. If you have some beautiful art, make something with it. Don't just leave it in the digital world. Make something of it, whether it's a book, an album, a photograph for the wall. Make it something more permanent that, you know, the generations can enjoy. That's my little.
I like it, and I like that we have printers now like LightJets and Lambdas and Chromeras, and for at home we have HDR.
He said Lambda. He said Lambda. See?
and we have HDR ink sets and things like this, so you can make these prints that are going to be super archival.
3D printers.
And they're gonna look beautiful because they have wonderful ink sets or wonderful technology in them. So yes, I agree. Make some prints.
Again, we're running long, and I want to.
You're fine.
Fortunately, like I said, this begs for a part 2. Did you ever see of your work, Mark, an 8x10 transparency off of an LVT film recorder?
Absolutely. Oh my goodness.
They are the most beautiful things.
It is an 8x10 transparency, straight out of a 8x10 camera or out of one of those film recorders because it came from the computer. Oh wow, it makes you drool.
The closest thing I can compare that to nowadays, I try to explain to people, is I think it's some of the Retina displays on our things like the iPad Pro or the iPad. It kind of, to me, starts to get close to what that 8x10 transparency was like as it sat on the light table.
Yeah.
Anyways, as I said, thank you so much, Mark. It's been a wonderful podcast. Thank you again for joining us. Audience, please share this around. Put the links once again on some of your other groups that you associate with. As you can see, this was an amazing show today, and this is what, our 21st or 20, something like that, depending on when it airs, our 21st episode. We'd love for you to send us any comments in on the pixeLobby, any suggestions of artists you'd like us to interview, any thoughts, any constructive criticisms. We'd appreciate, no problem at all, and let us know. So that should just about do it, and please remember, take a photo. It'll last longer.